Have you been deceiving me all this time? You're the worst. I want a divorce. Learning of my husband's secret, I was naturally furious.
Oh, sure. I don't mind divorcing. Just remember, you're the one who said that. I'm not paying any alimony since you want the divorce.
Despite the cause of the divorce being his fault, his further appalling remarks made me feel sick. Then, an unexpected person spoke up.
Don't get too carried away. Someone like you should just go to hell.
My name is Paige, a 30-year-old office worker. My husband, Claude, a colleague at the company, was always at the center of attention with his bright personality and competence at work. I was secretly admiring him, so I was surprised when he confessed his feelings. There were not a few female employees in other departments aiming for Claude, and behind the scenes, they would say,
"Why would he choose someone so plain?"
When I later demanded to know why he chose me as a marriage partner, I was so frustrated I nearly lashed out. Claude's family consisted of mom-in-law and a much younger sister-in-law, a family of 3. I heard that his father had passed away from illness a few years ago.
Dad was really strict, you know. He used to yell a lot. Sorry.
Whenever we talk about parents, my husband would look a bit apologetic. That's because I don't have parents. They died in an accident before I was fully aware, and I was raised by my grandparents on my mother's side of the family, who are also no longer with us. The only images I have of my dad and mom are from a few photos shown to me by my grandparents. My favorite is their wedding photo, where they both look so kindly smiling. That picture is always carefully tucked away in my schedule planner. However, I once dropped that photo at work, and Claude, who happened to be passing by, picked it up.
Miss Page, do you always carry around your parents' wedding photo? That's unusual.
That seems to be what started our conversations. When he proposed, he said,
"I want to become Page's family from now on."
I was so happy. I cried, not knowing it was all a lie. Mother-in-law Betty and sister-in-law Abby were very kind people. Abby lived in a different state, and we didn't meet often, but she always cared for me during Thanksgiving and Christmas.
"Paige, if Claude gets selfish, come talk to me. I'll scold him."
I'm not like Abby. I won't fail at marriage.
This kind of exchange often led to sibling squabbles, which was the usual pattern. While trying to appease them, I felt a little envious that they could have such arguments within the family. I thought our marriage was going quite well, but there was one thing that troubled me. Not this month either. Rubbing my aching back, I murmured to myself, we had been married for a while, but we're still not blessed with children. Every month, with the arrival of my period, I felt downhearted. Claude would comfort me, saying,
"This is something only God can give us. Let's keep trying at our own pace."
Once I suggested going to the doctor together, but after he said,
I'm fine. Maybe we can just wait and see."
A year was about to pass. There's no deadline for the body, but now, over 30, I did feel a bit of urgency and found myself sighing more often unconsciously. It was during Thanksgiving that year.
"Paige, what's the matter? You just sighed. Don't tell me you had a fight with Claude."
Realizing I had let out a sigh, Abby, my sister-in-law, who was washing dishes next to me, asked with concern, "Oh no, it's not a fight. It's just that, well, we've been having trouble having a child." Upon hearing my words, Abby's face turned more serious than I'd ever seen. What? What is it? Is something wrong?
"So, what does Claude say about having kids?"
Abby, still focusing on the dishes, asked me quietly.
"Claude, he says it's a gift from God, but when we got married."
When we got married, I had a talk with Claude. My grandparents were very kind, but I remember feeling envious when my friends talked about their parents. I longed for a family and told my husband I wanted to have children as soon as possible. Claude agreed, saying,
I love kids. I bet our kids would be adorable.
as I spoke, I felt Abby's hand washing with more force.
Have you talked to Mom about this?
Betty? I haven't spoken much about it since it's a sensitive topic, but she has given me advice sometimes, saying, you'll surely get pregnant eventually. My husband and I hadn't been able to report a pregnancy, and Betty never pried into our business regarding children. I knew friends who became neurotic due to the pressure from their mother-in-laws to produce grandchildren quickly, so I felt blessed with mine. That day, Abby kept a puzzled look on her face and didn't talk much. I wonder if I said something to offend her. That's what I was thinking when I got a message from Abby that night. The message was an apology for her attitude that day. And
I have to visit next week for something. Can we talk then? And please keep this between us, don't tell Claude.
I didn't see any reason to refuse, so I replied, understood. Perhaps there's something she knows about Claude that I don't. It was obvious from Abby's demeanor that day. Lately, I've been having some dissatisfaction with my husband too. Claude had a tendency to look down on others. He'd come home beer in hand and casually badmouth his colleagues, even though I work at the same company. When he talked down about colleagues I got along with, I snapped. Isn't it a bit harsh? Sure, you've outperformed them, but they're still our co-workers. That's not a nice way to talk. He laughed snidely through his nose and said,
Look, results are everything in this world. I'm contributing to the company with my work. I can't stand being compared to those idiots.
There was someone my husband particularly disliked, our boss, Manager Harwood. He had a stern face but was competent and reliable. He was over 40 and single, as far as I knew. However, it seemed Mr. Harwood had recently found a girlfriend. While I thought it was good news, Claude mocked.
That gorilla's trying to be stylish, wearing fancy ties recently. Ridiculous.
No harm in that? I thought it suited him, I defended. My husband disrespectfully referred to our boss as a gorilla. Mainly, Claude's good performance was because Mr. Harwood had recommended him to take over his clients when he was promoted to manager. Despite being favored, I sense a nastiness in someone who acted like a good subordinate to your face but spoke ill of you behind your back. You see new sides of people after marrying them? Sides you never knew existed. It's awful, but listening to Abby's story made me seriously consider what to do going forward. I feel indebted to Betty for all the support, and the thought of divorce makes me feel guilty. Back then, the thought of divorce was still crossing my mind regarding Betty. Then came the day we had promised to meet. I was expecting Abby to come alone, but there she was saying,
Sorry, Paige. Look, Mom's here too.
With Betty standing beside her, looking down.
We need to talk, Paige. You still want children, right?
Huh? Yes. I've always wanted children.
Betty and I have discussed it, but I haven't been able to bring any good news. I'm sorry.
Hearing this, Abby glared at Betty.
Paige, let me be clear. You should leave my younger brother, Claude.
As Abby said this to me, Betty, who had been silent, shouted in a voice louder than I'd ever heard.
No way! Divorce? The neighbors will gossip about me again.
Her shout made me shudder involuntarily.
So, this is about what Mom wants, right? Have you ever considered Paige's feelings? She's been struggling with not being able to have children. How can you not understand?
By the time I got there, tears were already welling up in Abby's eyes from their argument.
Abby, why do you say I should leave him?
I was out of my depth and could only ask that. Maybe Claude is sick or something? I wasn't foolish. I could tell from their exchange that my husband was probably a hopeless case. Still, I didn't want to face the reality that all the time I had invested might have been in vain. Abby, seeing the discontent on my face, asked,
Do you know why I divorced my ex-husband?
I thought it was just irreconcilable differences. I never pried into someone's divorce reasons, assuming that was all it was. Abby took a deep breath.
You see? I couldn't have children with my ex-husband even after 7 years.
They had gone to the hospital, where tests showed nothing was wrong with either of them. Still, they were told that sometimes pregnancies just don't happen, even after treatment. Eventually, trying for a baby felt like an obligation, and slowly a gap formed between us.
Every time I saw my former mother-in-law, she'd make snide remarks, but no one helped. Then one day, I discovered my ex-husband's affair, and that the woman was pregnant. It was painful to live,
Abby said with a bitter smile. After the affair, Abby and her husband divorced. Her ex-husband was happy to pay the settlement in a divorce court if it meant he could remarry his mistress. After hearing this grim tale, I asked, Didn't you think about divorcing before things got to that point and returning to your parents' home? Abby shook her head quietly in response.
This house has always revolved around Claude in a bad way.
According to Abby, Claude had been a problem since childhood, causing their parents-in-law much distress. Their late father-in-law was a strict man, often ending up in physical fights when scolding Claude for his wrongdoings. Betty always coddled Claude, perhaps because he was a latecomer child, and it seemed she never even scolded him. When Claude became a college student, he soon caused a scandal.
Claude got a high school junior pregnant back then. Dad was furious, but Claude said he had no intention of taking responsibility.
Abby shared. Father-in-law went to apologize to the girl's parents, but her husband was noticeably absent. Eventually, the girl chose to keep the baby, and Claude has neither acknowledged it nor paid child support. He seemed to have no interest in his own child that was about to be born. Hearing of my husband's disgraceful behavior made me feel nauseous. Then the entrance door opened.
I'm home. Oh, what's up? Mom and Abby too? Is Paige taking a half holiday today too? Should have invited me.
He said cheerfully, assuming we were out enjoying a meal together. His innocent demeanor irritated me, and I confronted him.
Claude, I heard from Abby. You haven't recognized them, but you do have a child, don't you? What else are you hiding from me?
Claude, who had been laughing joyfully, suddenly turned serious and glared at Abby before heaving a deep sigh.
Look, Paige, you think I'd hide something from you? It's all Abby's made-up stories. She's been mentally unstable since her last marriage. Prone to pathological lying, right? Right? Right, Mom?
He defended. To that, Betty replied with an indecisive,
I'm not sure what to think.
Claude clicked his tongue lightly at Betty's response and said,
Anyway, don't meddle in our marital issues. Hey, Abby, why don't you try a matchmaking party? Even our guerrilla manager found someone, so there's still hope for you.
He was rude, but again laughed as if he was having a good time. Abby just watched Claude quietly and then said,
Claude, you haven't changed a bit. Always lying. Back then, you always had an excuse, saying it was the other person who came on to you.
After saying that, Abby pulled out a voice recording from her pocket.
You lie. But are you stupid too? Your stories never add up. Back then, I started recording our family discussions, you know?
Abby pressed the playback button after saying that. Next to her, Betty reached out with a snarl.
Stop it! Why bring up the old story now? Let's just forget it already.
It's Paige's right to know. She doesn't have to suffer because of a liar like this.
The recording began with the voice of an older man yelling.
What are you thinking? Involving a young girl? And she's still a high school student at that? It's outrageous.
The conversation that followed involved four people. The voices other than the older man were familiar, which suggested the angry voice belonged to the now deceased father-in-law. After the shouting, younger sounding words from Claude followed, echoing what Abby had just mentioned. Claude glared at Abby as if to scold her for unnecessary meddling.
Explain yourself with your own words. How many other girls have you hurt by repeating the same actions? And what did an angry dad say to you, huh?
My husband just glared at Abby silently.
Paige, this guy was so bad. Dad yelled to have him castrated. A few months later, he came back smiling, saying he got a vasectomy. Creepy, right?
I was severely shaken by Abby's words. Huh? Vasectomy? That means... It meant Claude was practically incapable of reproducing. And he married me without revealing such a critical fact.
The surgery is supposedly for those over 30, but he went out of his way to find a hospital. Where did the money come from? I wonder.
Abby glanced at Betty briefly. Betty was sweating profusely, whether from nervousness or something else. Abby seemed to have thought that I knew about this and had married Claude regardless. But after finding out that I wanted children, she confronted Betty, who had flippantly said, "Just keep it to yourself. Paige might give up on kids someday. Divorce would be bad for our public image."
So, you'd been deceiving me all this time? You're the worst. I'm going to divorce you.
I had struggled with not getting pregnant, and to think he encouraged me. The cause was Claude. And to think Betty knew yet said nothing. I felt on the verge of losing faith in humanity. Seeing my furious state, my husband said,
Oh, sure, I'm fine with divorcing. But remember, you're the one who said divorce. Don't expect any alimony from me.
Had I known he was this kind of person from the start, I never would have married him. Tears of frustration welled up. Abby had been on my side to the very end.
Enough with your arrogance! Someone like you, an enemy of women, deserves to fall into hell!
Claude ignored Abby's words, and so Claude and I were divorced. I hired a lawyer introduced by Abby and sued Claude. Perhaps he hadn't expected me to go that far, but I managed to get a small amount of settlement money from him. When we divorced, I asked my husband why he married me.
I just wanted the status of a married man. But family ties and such are a hassle, aren't they? In that regard, you were great. No family. No bothersome relations.
He had said that. I was so angry. I felt like I could explode. I wanted to punch him. After the divorce was finalized, I couldn't stand sharing the same space with Claude and handed my resignation letter to my boss, Mr. Harwood.
Was it? Was it him who caused this?
As that, I quietly nodded.
There's no need to quit. Can you help out in another department from tomorrow? I'll hold on to this resignation letter for now.
It was the following week when Claude received the transfer orders to the branch office. It was in a remote rural area on the outskirts of the state, a place to which people were sent when they caused problems, though nobody would say it outright. Essentially, this meant Claude had been sidelined from the path to promotion. Claude, seemingly unable to accept this, confronted Mr. Harwood.
I can't accept this. Why me? Haven't I been performing well? Better than anyone else here.
His colleagues glared at him for such remarks.
You might have good sales numbers, but what about after that? Do you properly greet the customers? We're getting complaints from clients you've managed. They don't trust the new reps. You also have the highest cancellation rate. These colleagues you look down on are the ones covering for you.
Stammering, Claude could only say,
No, but that's... Besides, this is a company decision. Or can't you take an order from a gorilla?
Claude's face reportedly went pale at Mr. Harwood's words. By the way, I never told Mr. Harwood anything about my ex-husband's bad behavior. Afterward, Claude was transferred to that infamous branch and I was able to return to my original department. All my colleagues were supportive, saying I did well to get rid of such a guy. A year later, I attended Mr. Harwood's wedding. He had met his bride at a marriage hunting party.
Paige, thank you for coming today.
The bride, the day star, approached me.
Abby, long time no see. That dress looks great on you.
As I complimented her, she blushed and said,
It's my second time, and since we're both over 40, I thought just family would be enough, but his parents were so enthusiastic.
Abby laughed shyly. I was truly surprised when I learned that Abby was Mr. Harwood's partner. They were both so shy about their relationship that they kept it secret until the marriage. When Mr. Harwood was pondering Claude's case, he said,
I'm cutting ties with the family, so feel free to do what you must.
Those words seemed to have encouraged him. Indeed, Betty was nowhere to be seen at the wedding. Betty has been mostly homebound ever since. I guess the bad rumors. Betty was worried about must have spread in the neighborhood, but she's stranger to me now, so it doesn't matter. While Abby and I chatted, Mr. Horwood's mother came over, saying, Abby, are you feeling okay? Come on, have a seat. How many months along is the baby now?
Just 4 months. But everyone's so worried, but I'm truly happy.
A tear gleamed in Abby's eye.
It's too early to cry,
I said, and we both laughed together. Since then, I've found a new love. He's a high school classmate I reconnected with after a long time, and his parents, whom I met a few times during our student days, are all very kind people. Not long after we started dating, I met his parents again. Unlike me, who felt self-conscious about my divorce history, they were eagerly asking,
So, when's the wedding?
Despite everything, I believe I can finally be happy this time.